Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching The Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. We're joined by Danny Haiphong. I wanted to bring you back on the show because I want to say once a week, at least once a week, there's some sort of hysteria about China in the news. You're covering it way more than I am, which I love, and your knowledge on the subject and how much China is misrepresented. And the fact that you're immediately called like a China puppet, it's like, well, I got to have him on the show then. I mean, I'm good friends with Lee Camp. He's a Putin puppet. I just love you guys puppeting me around. I can't think for myself. So I love having puppets on the show. Just, and even time somebody accuses you of that, I'm always like, well, that's another reason why I know what he's doing is good work, because you're calling out the nonsense. And one of the things right before the show, I was just going to scroll through Yahoo's homepage just to see what is the most recent China's the Evil Empire story of the day. And from the weekend, I just heard about this. Some UFC fighter, had a Chinese flag wrapped around him, like every UFC fighter from any country in the world, like Max Holloway, who just recently fought, he's from Hawaii. He'll wear the Hawaiian flag because Hawaiians sort of identify with the Kingdom of Hawaii, which was illegally stolen by the United States in 1893. Anybody. Conor McGregor has the Irish flag, but a Chinese fighter wears the Chinese flag and it's ripped off his shoulders. So, tell us what the current state of affairs are. And just, we don't have to discuss too much the UFC thing. We can get into bigger issues, but that to me is just sort of endemic of this is what happens when you propagandize people and create this hysteria. We're seeing it, obviously. Last time we had you on the show was right around the time that Putin invaded Ukraine. And it's a very similar, China hasn't invaded anybody, but it's a very similar thing where if you point out America's involvement in Ukraine at all, you're just labeled, so you love Putin bombing the shit out of civilians. Like, no, I don't like that at all. So how do you, how are you seeing all this currently, and what have you been reporting on that maybe our viewers aren't aware of?
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on. Over the past few days, the United States, Joe Biden's administration, just signed off on its fifth arms sale, or at least proposed arms sale agreement to Taiwan, which is yet another violation of the One China policy. If your viewers may remember that it wasn't not a month and a half ago that Joe Biden said that he was committed to militarily intervening in Taiwan should China quote unquote invade. And so in 1982, this was, I think, the third joint communique between China and the United States as they were normalizing relations and as they were talking about the Taiwan question, and as they were formulating this One China policy, where the United Nations 11 years ago had already stipulated that the People's Republic of China was the rightful China to sit at the United Nations as the national representative. In that joint communique in 1982, it says very specifically that the United States is going to wind down its arms sales to Taiwan, because it had been ever since 1940, ever since Taiwan became occupied by the former ruling party, the Nationalist Party, in Taiwan, and then established the Republic of China there. The United States had been pumping arms there. The United States almost went to nuclear war with China over Taiwan. And we have Daniel Ellsberg to thank for violating the Espionage Act intentionally to break that news, to break that information in those documents that come from, I believe it was 1959. So in this 1982 joint communique, it says very specifically, the United States will not sell more arms to Taiwan in any consecutive year than it had in that year, and that eventually they would end. The United States has only increased these arms sales. There's a $14 billion backlog of arms sales, and this is since the end of the Trump administration. So now there's 5 more arms sales slated to Taiwan, from everything to naval logistics and all kinds of weaponry, a lot of it old weapons, but nonetheless, we see what's happening in Ukraine. Old weapons are used as well. So uh, that is one really hot flashpoint right now. And we have Mark Esper, the former Trump administration Secretary of Defense, who is still receiving pay compensation from Raytheon after leaving Raytheon as a high up in the weapons contractor right before he joined the Trump administration. But he's there right now, about to meet with Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen, the so-called president of Taiwan. And this comes just days after the Biden administration approved this massive arms sale. So that's one thing that's happening. And then a really, I think, important non-story right now is that the United States is enforcing what's called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And this is the most broad sanctions that the United States has leveled against China. It essentially is an industry-wide import ban from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which has been infamously said to have quote unquote forced labor and genocide of China's Uyghur ethnic minority, all of which, of course, are based on straight myth making. But these sanctions are significant because a lot is made about how Russia's military operation in Ukraine has influenced the economic crisis, this inflation crisis that the world is in. But actually, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is very important. One, it carries half of all of China's freight activity to Europe. So that's where half of China's freight activity to Europe goes. It's a key cog. It's the largest producer in the world of polysilicon, which every solar panel and most renewable energy products require. And it also is a massive exporter of cotton. So basically, if you think of like all these big corporations from Nike to H&M to any of these huge corporations that sell clothing on this huge global market, they are being hit hard by these sanctions, and it is worsening the inflation crisis. So you have these two things happening, and you also, I think, have a really, I think, the biggest story over the past month, which is the NATO summit and NATO's new strategic posture, which says that now China is a threat to NATO's security and that NATO is now going to place an emphasis and a focus onto China. And that's a big deal because
Jesus.
on the one hand, the NATO's existence is illegitimate, right? I mean, even if we just look at the last 3 decades, a lot has been made about how NATO's whole mission was to defend, quote unquote, Europe from the Soviet Union. To me, a questionable thing, really something based on the new Cold War. I mean, on the old Cold War. But once the Soviet Union fell, once it was no more, the idea of many, especially many people who stand on the side of any kind of peace, say, well, NATO's existence isn't really, it isn't really legitimate anymore. But yet it's expanded. It's expanded across Eastern Europe. It's admitted countries like Estonia and Latvia, which are on Russia's border, and now Sweden and Finland, which are incredible provocations. And of course, Ukraine is right at the center of NATO expansion and has been since 2008-9. It was basically made a de facto NATO state around that time. But now it's focusing on China, which China has nothing to do with the North Atlantic, right? China is all the way in the Pacific. But this just exposes how NATO is just a U.S. military alliance that cobbles up and gathers around its junior partners in Europe and then Turkey and a few others to wage war on the planet. Because we know that NATO, they had to put out a whole video on Twitter saying they're a defensive alliance. That Russia's making up all these lies. But we know NATO is instrumental in Afghanistan. We know NATO is instrumental in Iraq. We know NATO, before that, in 1999, bombed Yugoslavia, overthrew Libya in 2011, tried to do the same to Syria beginning in 2011. None of those wars were defensive. And now they're saying they need to pay more attention to China in an obvious ramp up of this new Cold War. So that's just a bit of the landscape of what's happening in terms of what the United States is doing and how it's maneuvering, right? Because there's so many maneuvers. Biden was just in the Middle East. He was talking to Israel and Saudi Arabia, and he couldn't stop talking about China and Russia. Everything was about how to keep Saudi Arabia from China and Russia, because Saudi Arabia has pretty good relations. Saudi Arabia is looking maybe to trade in the RMB, in the yuan, oil to China. And the United States is not happy about that. So the United States is doing everything it can to try to pull all of its so-called allies away from China. It's not really working. And so what we see is a lot of these desperate attempts to weaken China. A lot of it blows back onto the United States and onto Europe, like these sanctions. But the situation becomes more dangerous on the military front when we're talking about direct arms transfers to Taiwan. Biden directly 3 different times in just a year and a half saying that the United States is committed to a military intervention if China should invade. So there is a basis here to really worry and to hopefully mobilize against these really aggressive maneuvers, which I think need to be opposed just as much as NATO should be opposed in all of its dealings with Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, we talked about this last time. I talk about this in my show all the time. I mean, we have basically surrounded China and Russia with American bases. So, and we're funneling, weaponry to Taiwan. And again, I say this to people like, yeah, but China's the big evil empire. Well, there's much to criticize the Chinese government on, but they haven't been bombing the Middle East for 20 years now, have they? Like, they didn't create 6 million foreclosures here. Our banks did, and the government and the two parties that are bought by them did. China didn't poison the water in Flint, Michigan. They haven't, the reason we have excessive gun deaths in this country, it's not Chinese soldiers running in and shooting up parades and schools. It's Americans doing that. And that's again fueled by the gun lobby. It's for-profit domestic terrorism. And, I like, we do all this big flexing in front of China. I mean, we do all of these military, these naval operations in the Sea of Japan. Just, can you imagine if China's Navy was operating in the Caribbean? Like, we would go absolutely bananas. We would go insane if they were doing that. And that's in essence what we do with Japan all the time. And not to mention all the weaponry you're talking about to Taiwan. And again, we keep doing these sanctions after sanctions after sanctions. And we talked about this when you were on the show several months ago. Are these sanctions with Russia and forcing Europe to buy more expensive American oil and natural gas to block off China, is that going to backfire on America? And it seems like it's starting to. And now we're adding all of these sanctions that, like you say, against China, which are going to hurt these big corporations. Nike and the like is like, wait a minute. And if you hurt their bottom dollar, guess what? They're going to get someone in the White House. They're going to figure this out. They're going to, it's the United Corporations of America. So, Nike might have to figure out how to navigate the fact that Raytheon, is the Secretary of Defense. Austin is, he was on the Raytheon board of directors. So it's like those companies, the military industrial complex, I'm just asking questions. I don't know. I don't know who has the answers to them, but like, is this set up some sort of corporate battle between Nike and Raytheon? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, we have such a preposterous landscape that's been created here in the United States that now we're forcing people into world, we're I don't think people realize we're on like the brink of World War III here, and not to mention the United States itself is in the early stages of a civil war. If you look at any sort of civil war timeline, this is the early stages of one. And oh, by the way, we're facing extinction from climate collapse. Like, the UK today is the hottest place in the world. England, this is, and America just keeps doubling down on this. Like, we talked about this last time, and since it's unfolded even more, I mean, how do you see all these sanctions playing out in terms of the U.S. They already started to leak a little story about Biden might not finish his first term, which I knew he would never finish his first term. There's just no way. Like his cognitive decline in the primaries, I was like, this guy, if they put this puppet in there, they're gonna just so they can get Buttigieg or some other warmongering psycho that just can wave a diversity flag or whatever. But like, how do you see this playing out? You know,
Well, I mean, the entire U.S. sanctions regime is so expansive, but the areas where it's having the most negative impact is, of course, with Russia and China. And what the United States has done in order to soften the blow, or in my opinion, just to delay the blow, is to really tank Europe first, right? So what's happening with Europe is that they the United States has forced Europe into the most draconian sanctions possible against Russia, which only hurts European countries, hurts the entire EU right now, is in disarray. We've seen the political chaos, right, unfolding in the United Kingdom, unfolding in France, unfolding in Italy. I mean, there is a political chaos just across the Eurozone. And a lot of that has to do with what is happening and already known, or is already known to going to happen, which is the euro is in trouble. The euro is now at parity with the US dollar, which is really bad news for the EU. Because what that means is the United States dollar imperialism has succeeded in weakening the euro to the point where it is going to not be competitive with its dollar counterpart. And that's already sending shockwaves. And it's already sending shockwaves in a time where the price of gas and the price of oil is sky high. And that's because of the sanctions. So Russia has all countries that are oil exporters are raising the price of oil. All corporations that do the selling of oil, raising the price of oil because of the risks that these sanctions have caused and all of the instability that they've caused. So the fallout is that Europe is going to be hit with an economic crisis far sooner than even the United States. But the United States, Joe Biden administration, not the smartest people. I mean, they know what they're doing. They definitely have an agenda, and that agenda is definitely playing out in term with Europe, but it's not the smartest move because Europe is so central to what the United States does economically that anything bad that happens to Europe, similarly to anything bad that happens to the United States economically, is going to blow back on each side. So the United States is really only buying time. We know the interest rates are going up. The Fed is going to raise them, and then eventually cause a recession, an economic crisis. And that's really bad news for basically everyone, except for the big investors, the Wall Street, the military contractors. They don't get affected by it. Actually, they're looking for the payout afterward, and then they can just quote unquote like reset. They can just reset and then go about their business after huge bailouts and then do the whole thing over again. So the sanctions on Russia and then on China too, because there are two areas where the United States sanctions China, and we might not consider it sanctions, but the United States is still engaged in a so-called trade war with huge tariffs on Chinese goods. So, uh, farmers, anyone who wants to export to China, anyone who wants to do business with China right now is facing pretty heavy tariffs to do so, and that's hurting U.S. businesses. That's really just hurting the United States. But it's still happening, and there hasn't been anyone. Catherine Tai, the trade representative of the United States, she's not doing it. They're not doing anything about that. So there's still a Trump trade war on China, and then of course you have the sanctions on China's big tech industry. It's high technology like 5G, 6G in the works. On Huawei, there's a whole blacklist of Chinese high tech corporations that are on this blacklist. And that is just excluding the United States from any possibility of developing that kind of technology. Because we have telecoms here. They don't want to develop the industry. They don't want to because it costs too much money. They just want to take our money. They want to just up the prices of the goods that they already sell. They don't want to produce anything different. So China's tech industry has been sanctioned. And then, of course, with the human rights, as I said before, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, that is creating, and you kind of mentioned it, kind of a conflict. There is. The Wall Street Journal published not too long ago, I believe this was in the last 2 weeks, they published an open letter by a lot of big businesses that were like business representatives, right? The CEOs and other types, so-called scholars and economists. And they were like, you got to cool it with this China stuff because it's really hurting us. So we should kind of go back a little bit to the point where we actually consider China an important economic partner, because we have hundreds of billions of dollars there. We have hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investments and trade. So we might not want to wage war against that country. So there is this conflict that's happening, and I think it is a conflict between those who produce goods, right? These big monopolies that actually produce goods, and those who produce weapons, and those who produce money, finance. That's the conflict, right, between those forces.
It's such an interesting thing because, you know, you're really seeing how the complete out of control military industrial complex, like just insane out of control. Like they're already talking about Congress is about to give Joe Biden over $800 billion budget. Like $60 billion for Ukraine. I mean, you know, regular people can't get their SBA and PPP loans forgiven. You can't get student debt forgiveness, but man, we got money for these never ending wars. And obviously the military industrial complex loves it because they've just been on this 10, $20 trillion gravy train for the last 20 years. But China, I mean, all this saber rattling against China, all these big corporations all have factories in China. Apple, Nike, everything. Find me a product anywhere in anyone's home who's watching this where 90% of the stuff isn't made in China. Like, so, and the Chinese government, when everyone's like, oh, they're going to attack us. Why would China, and I've said this before, why would it invade 330 million of its best customers? Why would it do that? So the American State Department, the war machine, has so painted the whole country, and as you say, rightfully so, Europe, which is a big section of the global economy, because there's just a lot of money in that little continent. They're like, I mean, look at Europe. They're dependent upon cheap Russian oil. They're dependent upon Chinese labor for their products. America, and we said it before last time you were on the show, and they're just doubling down on this. They're really isolating themselves. And I bet you in that, like, you know, when this recent Middle East visit that Biden was like, China, China, China. And I get the feeling like a lot of these countries like Saudi Arabia and stuff are like, and they're just waiting for America to go under, and they're ready to do business with China. And China, as we've talked about the Silk Road Initiative, they haven't been bombing the shit out of people. They've been building them ports and soccer stadiums and whatever else. And you could argue, well, some of them, you know, they have all these strings attached, or they're just going to pull their money out the minute they don't get their way. Okay. But you're not getting bombed. I mean, and China has literally been slow. They're playing the long game of America is going under, and you see the money printing, the inflation that we're in. And as you said, like by doing these sanctions, they create more supply chain issues, which in turn creates more inflation. We're in the beginning of a recession. The Fed is hiking rates. July 28th is when they do the GDP, like they summarize what the first 2 quarters of the GDP are. And we're going to show 2 quarters of GDP decline and over 5% inflation. Those 2 indications are like, based on their central bank, Wall Street, Federal Reserve system, those are the indicators that say we are in a recession. And then they're going to announce it. And when they announce it, then it's a lot of these big corporations. I've done videos on it showing how they're ready. They kind of want this recession because some will get hurt, but a lot of big corporations will do fine, because look at the Great Resignation. Everybody didn't want to go to work. Plus, we also have 1 million people that are dead, many of whom were workers that now are not working because they're dead from COVID. So these corporate, and we all saw it last year, like Chipotle and Target offering 18, 20 some bucks an hour because they couldn't find employees. Well, when they announce the recessions here, they're going to gladly say, oh, we're laying people off. And so now they're not going to offer you 20 bucks an hour to work at Chipotle. They're going to take you back down to the $10 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is there. And, you know, we'll see like, oh, you want to have your union labor strike? Well, we might lay a bunch of people off. Like, you'll be less likely to do that. And they've also been liquidating. One of the reasons the stock market and the crypto markets are down, the big corporations, the hedge funds and everything, they've been liquidating and holding on to cash because they know cash is king in a recession. When companies are going belly up, when homes are facing foreclosure and short sale, that's what they did in the last housing crisis. They came through and they bought up. You know, you're facing foreclosure, you and your wife and your kid. You're like, uh-oh, they'll come in. We'll pay you this money. They did it to me. I lost my condo. That they're waiting for this. But you can't keep doing this Ponzi scheme. And because China and Russia and Pakistan are, even maybe India now and Saudi Arabia, I bet you they're all kind of quietly going, well, when America goes under, we'll we'll slide in. And so I just, it's like you say, it's the Biden administration is not smart at all. And neither really was the Trump administration, because both of these parties are horrible. And they're just it's the problem of America. It's just this toxic capitalism is always just go for the short-term buck, get the quick profit, get the stock with no longevity, anything. And China, just culturally, you know this, they're sitting there planning stuff out for 100 years from now. I mean, like, so
yeah,
it's really, and they're positioning themselves, even with the digital yuan, of like, you know, crypto's coming. They try to sort of stifle Bitcoin and get rid of Bitcoin miners and stuff like that, because they see that could potentially be a threat as well. I mean, Bitcoin is a threat to all central banks, but this really, like, America is pouring gasoline on the fire of its own demise, and it doesn't realize that it is. Or, as Mark said, it's just, capitalism is eventually just going to eat itself, which is what we're doing. I mean, and when America like has this big recession and the economy, and like, you know, the Democrats are going to get crushed probably in these midterms, unless because a lot of people are already seeing through the Roe v. Wade hysteria, because they're like, well, wait a minute, Nancy Pelosi, you just backed an anti-abortion Democrat. You know, like, a lot of people are like, wow, you guys could have codified this. And then they immediately sent out emails saying, oh, you got to support Roe v. Wade. I was just talking to a friend of mine whose girlfriend is a huge supporter of Planned Parenthood, and she donates like $25 a month, and Planned Parenthood called her up like, we need your money. And she goes, okay, yeah, but what's your guys' plan? And they're like, well, we're Planned Parenthood. We're just going to fight. But how? What's your plan? And they didn't have one. And so that seems to just be, the plan is just raise money. The plan is just turn profit. There's no long-term strategy for any of this. So when America like finally does like go under, and I predict in 5 to 10 years, the 50 United States won't exist. We'll split off. I don't know how it's going to look. Like, how do you see China reacting with that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad that you brought up sort of China's approach to those changing world. And a big change in the world is that the United States is declining, that its empire is declining, that its economy is shrinking. Not talked about a lot, but the United States is roughly half of what it was 70 years ago, right? Roughly half of, in terms of scale, in terms of its dominance over the overall world economy. It's roughly half. It's shrunk a lot, and it's contracted a lot. And it seems like every economic crisis, it contracts a little bit more, but you don't hear about it. CNBC won't do big coverage of this because
No.
that would be really scary. And it would also probably send their really snowflakey Wall Street investors through the roof to just hear about their own impudence and impotence. But really, China's approach to this whole, especially the last decade and a half of economic turbulence, has been to do what it's been doing, which is, and I'm glad you talked about like kind of buying time and kind of planning out into the future. Well, there's a reason for that. That's because China has a planned economy. China actually does set out markers. China does organize its economy in a way where it says, this is what we're going to achieve and accomplish. These are the tasks ahead. And our government is going to be very involved in making sure that it happens, regardless of whether private industry is doing it or state industries. Usually it's a mixture of both, are going forth with the plan. And so part of the plan, of course, is to build very robust ties with countries around the world, especially countries that have kind of this shared need. China once was a country that needed an incredible amount of infrastructure development. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. Now it's not, but it still has a lot of needs. It's still very poor in certain areas. Like it's never going to be it doesn't have arable land, so it needs a lot of help to maintain food sovereignty, which it does quite well. But it needs help. It needs cooperation from around the world. It needs energy because it's not an independent energy producer, and it never will be an independent energy
Mhm.
producer. Um, so it needs help in that regard. So China understands that in order to keep moving forward with its plans to continue to prosper, continue to meet certain social and economic objectives, right, to move forth from poverty alleviation to modern socialism, which is its goal by 2050. In order to do that, you need to have pretty peaceful, cooperative relations with every country and not to interfere in others' relations, even if, and this is what the left has a problem with, even if it's a country like Saudi Arabia, which certainly we have no qualms here of saying a human rights catastrophe, right? It's waging a war on Yemen internally. It murders journalists and does all kinds of other really, or it's a monarchy. It's a monarchy that's armed to the teeth by the United States. But China will still economically relate to Saudi Arabia because there are shared interests. And one of the things that the New York Times had to report during Biden's trip was that Joe Biden failed pretty magnificently, not just because he did a fist bump to Mohammed bin Salman, which was what got all the news, but also because Saudi Arabia, its government, whatever that is, its monarchy said, oh no, we're not going to cut ties with China. We're going to keep ties with everybody. And that is a monumental failure because the United States went in there with the objective of one, to bully Saudi Arabia and say, pump more oil on the market, get these prices down like it always does. It does this all the time. Pump more oil in the market. We hate Venezuela over here. Just flood the market, please, right? We want to tank their economy, and it'll do you some good, right? You want money, flood the market. And then they also went to Saudi Arabia and said, Biden said, look, we will give you all the technology you want. We'll develop your economy. You don't need China. And Saudi Arabia said, well, we'll take what we can get from you, but we're not going to cut ties with China. And New York Times had to say that already China has huge investments in Saudi Arabia, especially in telecommunications, where it's built 4G, 5G technology for that
Mhm.
country. So the approach, I think, for China will not change, right? And I don't think it's going to change unless there's an out and out war, which unfortunately is not an impossibility with the way that the United States, especially, is treating Taiwan and the South China Sea. The United States regular sending warships, regularly instigating and trying to promote separatism and a so-called independence movement inside of Taiwan. Both of those things, right? Continuous provocations on both of those areas just does threaten war. But short of war, China is going to continue to do what it's been doing, which is building the Belt and Road Initiative, continuing to grow that in order to both benefit from it and also help the world rise up. Because who would have thought that if other countries are not as poor, then you will also win too? That's how China views it. If Latin America, Africa, big parts of East and West Asia, if they are prospering and they have infrastructure and they can produce goods, then everyone wins because now there is a competition based on the fact that nobody has to starve, nobody has to we don't have to think about hunger and all of these other issues, right? That still are really huge for humanity, unfortunately. So China, that's how China's viewing its overall global strategy. And should the United States out and out collapse, I do think that there will probably be many more economic collapses before that. But should that happen, should there be a real unstable situation, I think China will do what it's always done, which is say, all right, this is the new global situation. Here's how we can behave. Here's what we can do. Here's what can help us, and here's what can help the world. And I bet, just as Cuba has always lent out a hand and said, even though you want to overthrow our government, we'll help, your hurricane, the residents of New Orleans who were destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, will help you if you want it. And Bush said, go screw yourself. China will do the same with the United States. You need help?
Right.
We have a model here. We haven't had an economic crisis in 30, 40 years. If you want to understand how we've done it, we'll always be ready to talk. But nonetheless, I think that will be the approach. And really, it's the United States' own kind of suicide watch that we're all observing, right? Like, how long until the U.S. How long can the U.S. go along in this way? Because right now it seems ungovernable. The economic situation seems it seems like it can't be ameliorated. It has, no matter how much of this kind of superficial stability it can regain, it seems like everything that happens next tends to be much worse and more grave for the economic and political, even the military situation, than what had happened prior. And that doesn't spell good news, I don't think, for the empire. And especially doesn't spell good news for anyone who thinks that this like anti-China tirade has any hope for benefits for any. There's no benefit to it, right? It's only going to hurt workers further. It's only going to hurt poor people further, no matter where they are. And so I think the point is, in order to fight this, in order to really have a robust opposition to all of the ills that are happening here, right here in the United States, we also have to take into account that the U.S. is waging an extremely counterproductive, aggressive policy of war toward China, which is right now the most important economy in the world. It's a pretty bad idea.
Yeah, nothing that we're doing makes any sense. I mean, just from a purely just economic standpoint, why would you go to war with this country that is economically like we're dependent upon? Like it doesn't. It's madness, and it's so. But America is an insane asylum. America is a cult. It's a death cult. I mean, America is just it's built on lies, and Americans have been so propagandized on all sides to think, communism is China is just murdering millions of people and all this stuff. And, not to excuse anything that China or Russia has done. But again, I always say this, America, we're the ones bombing the shit out of people. We're the ones, like, we have the highest prison system. We have the largest prison population in the world because we have a for-profit prison system. We're 1/5 the size of China, and we have more prisoners. I mean, like, it's insane to me. And I mean, look what we've done to Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Mann. Look how we treat journalists and whistleblowers. It's we have no room to talk. It's like the war crimes that Putin is bombing Ukraine. It's awful what Putin is doing to Ukraine, but who are we? Like, who are we? We've bombed weddings and stuff in Iraq. Like, who the hell are we to talk about any of this? Like, we're literally I always say we're the drug addict with face tattoos, having a meth lab in a preschool, walking into a bar going, "You guys drink too much. You need to go to an AA meeting." Like, we're completely out of control. And it's crazy to watch. Like, it is really in America. What's so disappointing is America could be this benevolent leader. We could be talking with China. Like, what we should be doing is, hey, China, Russia, let's all fix climate collapse. Let's do this right now. We have the money to do this. We can help. Let's all go green. Let's get rid of, let's transition. Because there was the head of the Bank of England gave a speech in 2015 or 2016 saying that there was a carbon bubble, meaning all of the fossil fuel money that we have out there is this huge bubble, and we can't, the whole world is dependent upon oil. Like there's an oil economy, the petrodollar, even the petro yuan. It's like he talked about, we have to slowly deflate this bubble because otherwise it's going to completely collapse. But the fossil fuel industry, which is, really hand in glove with the military industrial complex, doesn't want to, if we were thinking like we've got to get off of oil, it has to happen. And if we had real leadership, which Joe Biden's climate policy is horrible. He literally during the primary said, I'm going to have a middle ground climate policy. And we're seeing it. I don't know. Middle ground is even a little too favorable. He's signed more drilling permits on federal lands than Trump did in his first year. So we should be doing all of these things, working together. And instead we're just war. We've pushed, again, not excusing Putin's invasion, but we've pushed Russia in there. Like you said, NATO has been illegally expanding east for decades now. And, we could just be brokering peace between Taiwan and China. Like, hey, let's sit down and figure this out. Let's figure out Tibet. Let's sit down and talk about this. No, we just pump weapons in there. And of course they're going to say, no way. Imagine if there was Chinese weapons in Puerto Rico. If Puerto Rico said, we don't want to be in American territory anymore, or Guam or something like that, we would go fucking bananas. Like America would go nuts. If there was a Russian base, there was a Russian base just selling like Russian gum on the border in Canada, we'd go fucking bananas. We would go insane. America is a crazy place. Everyone talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but what is, again, a thing that was not told in the history classes I went to in college was, oh, by the way, we had just put missiles into Turkey, and that's when Khrushchev wanted to send the missiles here. So we've been playing this crazy game for decades. And so, it's really interesting to hear your take on this and how it's going to happen, because the economics, because, war and economics are very much intertwined. I mean, the central banks profit from war because the best part of war is everybody goes into debt. There's the debt and they get the interest from the debt. Yeah, it'll just be interesting to see how this is going to shake out, and if any of us need to leave the United States. I don't know.
It's a thought on a lot of people's minds, I think, these days.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I know a lot of people, myself included, like, well, I got to get out of here, and then I'll, like, oh, but I'm going to do this show, or I'm going to tour, or I'm going to get this new job, or someone's going to buy this house or whatever, and we're all sort of kind of one foot in, one foot out, kind of hoping America self-corrects and it turns around, because there's a lot of great stuff about America. We want to stay here. We grew up here. Our family and friends are here. Yeah. But it's, the idea of picking up and moving to another country is a challenging one. It's not an easy thing to do, even if you have a lot of money and you make good money online or whatever, and you can just, get a digital nomad visa. It's not an easy thing to undergo.
No. Definitely not.
Well, Danny, I really appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to update us on this stuff. And where can people follow you? And if you've got any upcoming stories or videos or anything like that, people should check out.
Yeah, sure. So, I've been doing a lot of work. So you can follow me at The Left Lens on YouTube. Definitely subscribe there, because I have been covering this. When you were talking, I was just thinking about how I think the biggest loss of this new Cold War posture that the United States has taken toward China is that, as you said, there are all these points of cooperation that could be had, which would be massively beneficial to human beings, right? I mean, look at how China has handled COVID-19, like their economy, contrary to what the United States and the Western countries say, their economy has been just fine. And yet people have lived, people have been able to survive. And there's been a lot. China's arguably, there were people who were saying this before the United States went basically off of the cliff when it comes to COVID-19. But if we had any sense, we would say, well, if the United States had done anything like China did, then the United States would have preserved a whole lot of human life and also a whole lot of its economic integrity over this very trying time. I mean, a pandemic. So there's that. And then, of course, climate change. China basically built the industry for renewable energy. It's by far the leader in both imports and exports and also in consumption of renewables. And it has real targets, not just a date for when it will be carbon neutral, but also targets for how we'll get there. And if anybody's been to China, you know that that is a real thing. That's not just some fake thing. That pollution has improved, that reforestation has increased massively. There's real efforts there. So yes, if the United States we actually want to take care of its historic emissions, its per capita emissions, which it leads by far in the world, then it would talk to China and say, wow, how did you do that? You know, we want to build back better, supposedly. Well, what did you do? And then they would say, well, you got to put the government into it. You got to like pour money into it. And then the United States would probably say, oh, well, no, no, thank you.
How are you going to pay for it? I mean,
yeah,
how are you going to pay for it?
No, thank you. We can't do that. We can't use the trillions of dollars that we pump through the Federal Reserve to do that. But we can, use it to throw contracts at weapons manufacturers. So there are all these
Wall
points,
Street
though.
bailouts. We always have the money for Wall Street bailouts
Exactly.
and war, but we cannot seem to figure out healthcare and saving the environment. Like we could literally put every American to work under a Green New Deal.
Yeah.
And the Green New Deal, if implemented correctly, could fix so many problems: wealth inequity, homelessness, education. It could fix so many problems while, oh, by the way, saving the planet. And like you say, we should be sharing ideas. We should be going, hey, China, how did you guys do this? We'd love to learn. Like, let's share ideas. That's the best ideas. If you've ever worked in any sort of collaborative environment, it's always great. Somebody comes in mid-range or outsider, and they look at everything you're doing and they have a completely different point of view and go, shit, I didn't even think of that. That's a great idea. Like it's something. And we should be doing that with China, with one of the oldest cultures on the planet.
And China could teach us how to do a Green New Deal because they have millions of people working on thousands of miles. I mean, they have 20,000 miles of high-speed rail. The U.S. has 0. So there's millions of people working huge jobs. It's all state-owned. It's all government jobs. So there's a lot of capacity to learn. And China is certainly, despite all of the criticisms against it, I think these are very unfair. China is not secretive about this. China would provide this information about how you do this, how it could be done, and how they could do it together. Because it's not like China and the United States don't have a huge economic relationship. They do. It wouldn't be that difficult. But it is the politics of it, of course, and the interests of the warmongers, the interests of big energy, and of course, the interests of the military-industrial complex that really, and Wall Street too. Wall Street is, despite what people say, no friend of China. Just read anything George Soros says about China, and Wall Street, no friend of China. So those interests keep that from happening. But nonetheless, if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at Spirit of Ho. Definitely subscribe to The Left Lens. Yes, follow Black Agenda Report. My next column is going to be about the empire's clothes being stripped off, right? The empire has no clothes. It's going to come out next Wednesday. And yeah, if you want to support me, patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. That's the place you can do it.
Awesome. Danny, thank you so much, man, for coming on the show. It's great to see you. I appreciate the work you're doing. Everybody out there, all you citizens of Gotham, follow what Danny's doing because he's bringing a perspective on China that most people aren't. And it really, it's eye-opening. And again, it's another area where our corporate media is lying to us and telling, creating another big bad villain and while America doesn't take responsibility for its own crap. So it's awesome. Danny, thank you so much, man, for being on the show, dude. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Graham. Have a good night.
All right. Take care, man.